Hello, my dear friends. How is it going? I hope I find you all in good health and safe and sound. I'm Marty Thurger, and today, for this final video of 2022 in this channel, I want to return to animism and talk a little bit about it once more. I found that an animistic worldview, as much as it is possible to deconstruct our current post-industrial and colonized mentalities and restart the process of reshaping our minds towards a far more animistic indigenous mind or indigenous animistic mindset. Well, animism, in my opinion, is indeed a way of life and a perspective of life that helps to build a greater respect for all life. If we haven't yet been able to understand what it takes for a life to exist and its true potential and value and sacredness, we aren't able yet to conduct our efforts to build a more habitable world for all life. Personally, I come from a violent background where violence has been normalized, unfortunately, and quite soon I have lost respect for life itself because amidst all the violence, life itself lost its meaning and importance, and unfortunately, empathy, the ability to place ourselves on other person's shoes, the ability to understand the feelings of another is something that is learned through experience and the sharing of knowledge that involves the perspective of others external to us. But as I was saying, unfortunately, when you grow up in ambiences or atmospheres where others' lives are not respected, empathy is something you simply aren't familiar with. But I'm not here to talk about my past or myself. I am simply stating that I have found animism to be of great value for personal improvement in constructing empathy and respect for all life. Because from this perspective, we broaden our views towards a wider understanding of what constitutes life and where to find personhood, and the need to socialize and be sociable to better understand the points of view of others and their struggles, their desires, their fears, their cultures, and their languages. I'm still a work in progress, to be sure. However, in these past 13 years or so, I have come to change my mind in relation to a variety of things and in relation to people in general, towards all persons, be those human, animals, or otherwise. So I try to be a better person, and animism has also helped me in that. In fact, if I have to sort of sum up my aim in this society and in life right now, aside from completely change what I once was, I would say that my aim has been to fight against racism, against sexism, and against speciesism. Our human societies surely have a multitude of troubles, struggles, problems, and several things we still need to work on as a society and as persons of this world. However, the great majority of the problems within our societies and such problems and wrong behaviors fomented by such issues that ultimately have a very negative impact reflected upon the world and all life. Well, most of our problems, one way or another, are rooted and sprout from these main three dispositions. Name a major problem we are facing these days that affects all societies and the world itself, and one way or another, such a problem is a ramification of one or more of these three cancers. All of which, sad to admit, I have inflicted upon others in the past, whether purposely or unconsciously or even unwillingly. Because many of us end up being the product of the societies in which we live in and the times in which we exist, the societies and the environments. And there are many things that have been normalized simply because they were not questioned, and the way such mindsets affect others were not questioned. But upon the moment any intelligent being starts to see the patterns and how one's actions affect negatively the life of others, and all the damage, harm, hatred, and even death that is inflicted, well, it takes a special type of selfishness and no small amount of stupidity to continue to have or behave in the same harmful manners. Which is why I think animism is a very important worldview to be taken into consideration, which helps us to avoid being the products of our societies which foment types of behaviors and mentalities that have brought us nothing but pain and suffering. As far as animism is concerned, perhaps the biggest problem in adopting this perspective on life, or rather what prevents the first impulse or a genuine curiosity towards the discovery and the rediscovery of animism, lies in the modern Western point of view, in which animism is certainly a vision of the world that is foreign to what we are used to understand. Or, in other words, it is strange and outlandish for what we are forced or were forced to accept, not out of understanding, but out of habit and normalization of habits, which we do not question because it was always like that, or it was always done like that. Interestingly, animism, or what we call animism, is the most widespread world perspective in the span of time of human existence, both geographically speaking and, of course, historically. It is imprinted in our human societies and rooted in our consciousness. It just seems something strange and distant, even erroneously understood as primitive, because we have distanced ourselves from a type of life that would insert us into a life and culture immersed in the natural world and in contact with its persons. Maybe this is one of the biggest problems, right? The separation of spaces due to what we consider to be the social or not. In our Western minds, we have been building a mentality in which the social space, right, is mostly human. And those we socialize with are other humans, usually even diminishing social spaces even more when we build racial divisions that further distance us from other humans even. Hence, having only a few social spaces that mostly fit into groups of people that we understand to be like us in terms of ethnicity, culture, language, and even of the same temporal and physical space, right? And even physical appearance. I spoke of this before in a past video from an anthropological historical starting point and the study of the science of religion. Animism was strongly understood as something primitive, childish, ignorant, viewed from a lens through basic racist concepts, according to which animism is a naive and erroneous view of obsolete and outdated races with low intelligence who are far from contemporary Western enlightenment. Completely horrible. However, animism is foremost an engagement with the other, to be social and sociable. Interactions and behaviors towards and amongst persons of the world. The world is the social space. The space between nature and society is itself social. Interaction is inevitable for the construction of knowledge, and such knowledge leads to a better understanding of all lives that exist and coexist in the world. There is an effort towards understanding the other, to create beneficial relationships amongst persons we share space with, the wider space in which the wider community of life exists. The social nature of relationships between people is much more comprehensive in animism, because it is not only the human being who is a sociable being and capable of socializing, but also a multitude of individuals and groups of persons scattered throughout the natural landscape, whether human, animals, or others. Humans, animals, and more than human persons, and other than human persons. The more we socialize, the more we are aware of the wider community of beings that exist. Animism helps us to step out of a confined social environment to instead open the way towards a wider environment on which we socialize with all manner of beings that share space with us and existence. A person who is an animist recognizes that the world is full of persons, only some of whom are human, and that life is always lived in relation to others. Animism is a way of thinking that aims at learning to act respectfully, whether in a caring way, but also constructively, towards other persons. Persons are beings rather than objects who are animate and social to others. Of course, not all beings are sociable, but from the moment there is personhood, an entity with conscious interaction is possible. And it is also possible to establish a relationship. Of course, I could be wrong, but over time it seems to me to be the basis of an animist thinking. Interaction towards the other, understanding personhood and what constitutes personhood, and through this understanding, respect is formulated because there's a more complex perception of what constitutes life and what is alive. Animism turns out to be a series of efforts to understand and communicate with others, be they human, animal, or otherwise. As mentioned earlier, the scientific perspective in relation to animism, until quite recently actually, was understood as a series of naive explanations of the world in which people are not enlightened or familiarized with the rational thinking of more advanced civilizations. Therefore, we have a series of documentation prepared by scientists, mostly from the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, whose biased perspectives and focused on their own modern cultures did not allow them to understand animism in the cultures and societies of various peoples they have interacted with. And therefore, such documents have become scientific works that are nothing more than an imposition of personal ideas influenced by the modern society of these contemporary scientists. Animism became even synonymous with superstition and a belief common among so-called primitive peoples that objects and natural phenomena are also alive and have feelings and intentions. So it's not just the biased perspective that was constructed in relation to an understanding of animism, but also the lack of a will to comprehend it led to a simple understanding that animism is the belief that everything is alive and possesses a spirit. But animism is highly rational. Of course, this doesn't mean that there isn't a belief that many things in the world are alive and have a spirit. It just means that it is not that simple. It is precisely the will to socialize with persons of the world that we comprehend the existence of personhood. It's from socializing that we understand consciousness and life, and we are able to detect personhood. Animism is something intensely rational, but also highly social. It is the construction of knowledge of appropriate means of engaging with persons of the world. That knowledge can only be acquired precisely by establishing relations or relationships with entities that are social and sociable and allow engagement. And this engagement is through a series of pragmatic behaviors such as offerings, ceremonies, rituals, and so on and so forth. In a way, the past scientific anthropological perspective in relation to animism and animistic indigenous peoples ends up being funny. Funny in the sense that such scientists have pointed out to the lack of rationality in animism and from animistic peoples, but it was precisely the lack of rationality from the part of such scientists, and of course an overall sense of civilizational superiority, that did not permit them to socialize with animists as persons of the world. And so the lack of the rational sense of being sociable did not permit such scientists to understand animism in the first place. Therefore, the result of these scientific works are misleading and inaccurate. To understand animism, we have to be rational and engage with people in a way that we see them as persons. So we deal with them with respect. Respect here isn't a false sense of courtesy, as in already having the predisposition of seeing such beliefs as complete nonsense. And so we engage with such cultures and peoples by being dishonest with ourselves and with them, and pretending that we respect just to avoid enmities. That's not an effort to understand anything. Respect here is the recognition of the other and engaging with them through their perspective. This takes time, observance of behaviors, the genuine interest of understanding the points of view and the interactions that are made through cycles of socialization and through conversations. To put it as simple as an example, when we deal with indigenous peoples, more often than not, we pretend to respect them to avoid insulting them or being seen as racists, or out of fear of creating enmities and social awkward moments, or being called out as colonizers and such other terms. Respect isn't by being dishonest with ourselves and with others. The actual respect towards indigenous peoples is by listening to them, creating conversations, engaging with them, the effort of putting ourselves in their shoes to be able to understand their struggles, their fears, their needs and desires, their languages and traditions and cultures, being social and sociable. All it requires is the rational process of listening. That's how we create lines of communication and find common grounds. And we establish relationships. By knowing the persons towards whom we create social ties, we start to construct genuine respect because we start to know them. This is the same thing in animism. It is the effort of engaging with those who have the predisposition to be engaged with. Socializing. That's how we understand life and how we get to understand where personhood lies. It's not a question of believing that everything is alive, but knowing what is alive. Not every rock is alive, but some are. How do we know which ones? Well, we socialize, we engage, we share and exchange information and knowledge. This engagement creates responsibility and a series of actions we continue to take in order to maintain a relationship through respect, establishing symbiotic outcomes, which can only be possible by honoring such relationships with the proper care, attention, decency, and politeness. So, my dear friends, I just wanted to say these words before this year comes to an end, we are about to move towards a new cycle, and I think it is important that we do the effort to establish conversations with persons and allow people to grow and evolve. Lately, in our fervent hunger to be champions of righteousness, we have been excluding and ignoring a lot of people. In most cases, we have not done the effort to establish conversations that aim towards a more constructive engagement with persons, but instead ostracizing people for their personal beliefs, which, even though they may indeed be wrong at times, quite wrong, if we keep repudiating people for what they say, what they believe, and what they do or have done in the past, we do not allow them to grow and evolve and get out of that. And they will remain the same, behaving in the exact same manner, thinking in the exact same manner. As such, we do not actively solve problems, we just ignore them. But they keep festering until they spread, and it will be far more difficult to deal with such problems when they reach a stage too great to handle through diplomatic and respectful conversations. We must allow people to grow and evolve, especially when they are doing the effort to become better persons. Establishing conversation with the others, being social and sociable with persons of the world to construct a genuine sense of respect towards another whose life and existence is meaningful simply because they are alive, and as such, they are valid. Fighting against racism, sexism, speciesism, and other major problems in our societies isn't about silencing people or forcibly wanting them to behave in a manner which we believe to be right, and indeed it may even be right. But when we force people to do something, for a time they will proceed in doing what they have been told because they are forced to. But it won't last because they aren't doing it out of understanding. They aren't doing it because they comprehend and are sensitive and responsive to it. When behavior is forced, there's no meaning to it. People don't need to be forced to do anything. People need to understand why certain behaviors are better than others or less harmful. They must be knowledgeable concerning the implications of their actions and perspectives and behaviors. People must acquire the awareness of the impact of certain behaviors and ways of thinking so they can be more sensible to life. So we must allow the ability to learn and relearn behaviors. By understanding the other, we build genuine respect. Respect isn't forced and cannot be demanded. Respect is earned and acquired. Respect towards life is part of the process of empathy. Empathy is also learned. We avoid, for instance, as an example, we avoid killing another, mostly because in our societies it is a crime to kill some persons but not others. And there are consequences for the lives that are taken, which our societies have stipulated that must not be taken. So we avoid certain behaviors because there's punishment, and not because we genuinely understand the sacredness of life and its existence. It's not through the prospect of punishment that we genuinely become good persons. Goodness, I think, and I may be wrong of course, but goodness comes from understanding that doing harm is possible and nothing physically prevents us from provoking it unto others, but we choose not to do it because we understand the value of life and we are capable of understanding and sharing the feelings of another, be they human, animals, or others. Thank you so much for watching, my dear friends. See you on the next video and next year. I'll be around for as long as it is possible and not one moment longer. Farewell, my dear friends, and I wish you all strength of mind and spirit. And with the utmost respect towards each living person listening, I bid you all a very fond farewell. Goodbye.